Yeah, we're live, 6:59. Cheers to everybody. It's the weekend, right? It definitely is the weekend. Frosty cold beverage for the weekend. That's awesome. Tonight we're going to talk about piston to valve clearance and dish pistons and flat top pistons. Primarily, if you take a look at the thumbnail that I have up, hopefully the people that are here live maybe didn't see it, but all of the people that are coming after that, taking a look at that piston and talking about piston to valve clearance. Lots of stuff to cover tonight on that because it's very cool stuff. And so right off the bat, I'm going to go up and throw the poll up so that I don't forget it, so that we have it here. Does a factory dish piston, think LM7, offer more piston to valve clearance than a flat top? Think LR4. So does a factory dish piston offer more piston to valve clearance than a flat top? And we're assuming, I'm going to put that in there just so people know, on the same motor. And we'll answer that with a question mark. So does a factory dish piston like an LM7 offer more piston to valve clearance than a flat top? Like one of the common things is for people to put the flat top LR4 4.8 pistons in the 5.3, especially upgrading from the LM7 stuff. Now, some of the 5.3s, like the L33, have flat top pistons in them already because they were combined with the bigger chamber 799 243 heads. But the question is, if you change nothing else except for the piston, does that dish piston offer you more piston to valve clearance? Boom. And we are up. Why can I not? Oh, the question is too long. Oh, 111, that's why. There we go. Now we're up and rolling. Yes, we are live. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about piston valve clearance. One, the first thing I want to mention is I have a really good video coming up on piston to valve clearance that should illustrate it as good or better than any video that I've seen out there, because it's going to show you what actually happens while it's happening. So it'll be fairly good stuff, and it'll be easy to visualize exactly what's happening, because one of the biggest misconceptions about piston to valve clearance comes with valve lift. Everybody asks, some people ask, many people ask, how much lift can I get away with? They're thinking that lift somehow has a major effect on piston to valve clearance. So they think that because we have a 480 lift cam or a 440 lift cam, and we go to a 500 lift cam or a 600 lift cam, that it's going to dramatically reduce piston to valve clearance. And the reality is that while it does change piston to valve clearance a little bit, it doesn't change piston to valve clearance very much when you change the lift. If all you were to change is the lift, it would change piston to valve clearance very, very little, especially if you had a camshaft with stock duration in it. You're going to be nowhere near piston to valve issues anyway. And you could put as much lift as you want in there. You could put a 1-inch lift cam in there. The thing is that you're not holding the valve open long enough where it gets into the interference problem. So lift has very, very little effect. And we'll show that in the video, so it will be good stuff. We'll show that. What has a big effect is how long you're holding it open. So when you're doing that, and like I said, it'll be easier to see when we visualize it, when we're rotating the motor, you'll be able to see piston position relative to what the valve's doing. And you'll be going, oh yeah, that's right. It's not going to, like if it had more lift, that really wouldn't do very much. But when we hang it open longer, here's where it hits. Here's where the piston position and the valve interference problem occurs. That's where you need to look at it. It's not everywhere. In fact, it's most places it's not a problem. And it's different on the intake and the exhaust. On the LS, we have you know, a lot of room on the exhaust side, where if you're going to run into piston to valve issue on an LS, you're going to run into it on the intake side. So being able to illustrate that in real time and show you what's happening with and with different camshafts too. So I can show you the stock camshaft. I can show you other kinds of camshafts, camshafts where we get into a problem with piston to valve clearance, going with something that's bigger than the, you know, something in the mid 230s or something that has a tight LSA. We can show changes in LSA, you know, how all of that affects it, so people can have a better understanding of what's really going on when we're changing cam timing and its relation to piston to valve clearance. So it'll be very cool. So the question remains for tonight is, wow, it looks like I created something here. Does a factory dish piston offer more piston to valve clearance than a flat top? So far, we're split about 50-50. So we'll get into that discussion in a little bit. We'll get some more people here voting. So if you haven't voted yet, make sure that you do vote. There's 116 people watching. Make sure you go in and vote on the poll. Let's get as many people up there as we can, so we know who's on what side, before I go ahead and cover that. But piston to valve clearance is a very important issue, because what it does ultimately is limit how much camshaft we can run. The question comes up very often. I'm not going to say everybody. I'm not going to say always, because then everyone can make fun of me. Not that they aren't doing that already. But the question comes up, and that's how much camshaft can I run? So there are some people that want to go all of it. Like, what will fit? How much camshaft can I put in a 4.8 or a 5.3 or 6.0 or 6.2 or whatever? And there are a couple of things that change piston to valve clearance for those different combinations. One of them obviously is flat top versus a dish piston. Or does it? The other thing is, when most of the combinations, a 5.3, a 5.7, a 6.0, 6.2, all have the same stroke. So their acceleration rate up to and away from top dead center is the same. They all have the same rod. They all have the same stroke. So their movement is going to be the same. The piston movement is going to be the same. The 4.8 has different piston movement. It has a longer rod and it has a shorter stroke. So its position relative to the camshaft is going to be different. The other thing that affects piston to valve clearance is the cylinder head. You have to take a look at the actual valve drop of the different heads. Obviously, the thing that will come into play is valve size. So on a 706 head, we have a smaller valve than we do on a 799, a 317, a 241. Also, because those chambers are different, those heads might not all have equal valve drop. So their relative piston to valve clearance can be different because of the size valve and also because of the valve drop, the way that it comes down, the distance that it has to travel. The other thing that happens is on a 6.2, we introduce a whole different chamber, a whole different head, the LS3 style head or LY6, all of those. We introduce different valve drop on that head, and we also introduce a different size valve, which can also affect piston to valve clearance. So we have a 2165 valve and we have a 189 valve on a 706 head. Dramatic difference. So as the valve comes down, it comes down at an angle. So as it comes down as something that's bigger. And something that bigger is going to hit in potentially more places. So, and that assumes that something is something else hasn't changed, but it has, because the valve drop has changed. On aftermarket heads, we can get a valve angle change too, which can affect piston to valve clearance. The trick flow back in the 5-liter Ford days, the trick flow twisted wedge head, because they altered the valve position, actually improved piston to valve clearance. And as you reduce the angle of the head, you go from a 20-degree head to an 18-degree head to a 14-degree head, you can improve piston to valve clearance. That also happens with LS stuff. So if you get an aftermarket head and you have a valve angle change, you can improve the piston to valve clearance. So all of those things are going to make a difference when you're checking piston to valve clearance. Obviously, in addition to those things, the cam timing itself, that's kind of the big thing. So if you're going from a stock cam, and there again, it depends on which stock cam you're talking about. Most of the stock cams, ranging from the LR4, LM7 camshaft, all the way up to the LS9 camshaft, they're going to have varying degrees of available piston to valve clearance. They're going to be different because they have different valve events. In those cases, they're also used with different combinations. The LS7 obviously being one of them, a different bore size and a different piston design, different head design, all of that stuff. So it also will have different varying amounts of piston to valve clearance. The one thing I can tell people is here's the question that they ask, and here's what they want to know. Well, how much cam can I get away with? Okay, now I've milled my head 30 thousandths. How much can I get away with? Well, if we had an exact measurement on what you could get away with before that, which I don't think a lot of people have, if we had that exact measurement, we could do the math and determine how much 30 thousandths would change that. But because you took 30 off, we don't really know where it was to begin with. Was it a brand new head? What's the distance between the head and the start of the valve? And there's a lot of things that go on there. That's why I tell people when they're, especially people that are interested in having as much cam as you can, like how much cam can I put in there? Well, if you're that guy and you're interested in that, you need to learn how to measure piston to valve clearance. Because if you want, because here's what they want. I want all the cam I can fit, and I don't want to have any problems. You can see how those two things don't really go together. That's like running, I want to run all the boost to make all the power, but I don't want to change my rim gap. I want all the boost and power and the timing, but I want to do it on 87 octane. There's always those people. If you're going to try to run as much camshaft as you can, in order to be able to do that, you have to measure piston to valve clearance. You have to know what it is. And so I'll be showing you in the video that I'll be doing. That won't happen until after I go down to West Tech and have to make some major modifications to a motor to be able to show that. But it will be very cool. And so it will give you a really good idea on what's actually happening. But you have to measure it. Even after I show you what's going on, there's going to be no absolute number, because what people want is the easy way. They want to be told, yeah, you can run 15 pounds of boost on pump gas. And then when they go out and do it, then they go, well, Richard said I could run 15. So obviously he's wrong. Yeah, he is wrong when you don't have the tune right and you have your pump is too small and your injectors are too small and you wanted to run 26 degrees of timing on your turbo motor on 87 octane. Yeah, he was definitely wrong. But that's what they want, and unfortunately, you can't get that. You don't get to have that, because that's not a real thing. You don't get to have all of the good stuff without taking the responsibility, obviously, for your turbo actions. And it's the same thing with cam timing. If you're going to try to put really big cams in, you need to measure and see what you have. There has to be enough room. If there's not enough room, then you will have problems. And then to look at the pole, we can talk about the dish piston, which is an LM753 piston used in other stuff too, and a flat top piston, so the LR4. So if we had the same piston in the same motor, like a 5.3, we have a flat top 5.3 and a dish piston 5.3, and assuming that, and there's some variation, this is another variable, where is the piston at TDC relative to the deck height of the block? Is it, a lot of times with the LS stuff, it's out of the top. It could be anywhere from 2 to 5 or even 10 thousandths out of the block, out of the deck surface. So that limits piston to valve clearance. It can also be at zero deck. A lot of motors before this a lot of other kinds of motors are way down. Dodge motors are notorious for being 50 or 100 thousandths down in the hole. It's not good for detonation. But it has lots of piston to valve clearance if you put the piston way down there. And you don't ever have to worry about anything ever hitting. You can put whatever kind of camshaft you want to run in there, and it will work because the piston's so far down the hole that you never have to worry about it. The other way, obviously, is to put a valve relief in the piston. But in our discussion between a dish piston, which typically, because part of the piston has, a concave section, it's down 6, 8, 10, whatever, 15 thousandths compared to it being a flat top. So you would think right off the bat, well, it should therefore have more piston to valve clearance. The problem with it, and the problem, if you take a look at the photo that I used in the thumbnail, you can see why. If you have any idea, and we'll see that, because what I'm gonna do is when I do the video, I'm gonna demonstrate where that valve, if it does hit, if you run into a piston to valve issue, where that's going to happen on the piston. Because as the piston comes up and the valve is going down, they do it at a specific time. So it's not with the piston all the way at the top. So the valve doesn't come down and hit that when that happens. It's in a different spot. So the angle of the valve and all that comes into play. But I'm going to show you where that happens. And unfortunately for LS guys, and to answer our poll question here, that where that valve intersects the piston, especially as we go bigger in the valve that we use on the head that we're using, it intersects that piston on the outside of the dish. So it overhangs. If you look at the photo, the dish is in the center of the piston. Most of the piston is dish, but some, let's say that it's a 1/2 inch, a ring basically going all the way around the outside of the piston. If you look at that ring, the valve intersects with that ring. So it wouldn't make any difference whether it's a flat top or a dish. It's just going to hit with the flat top. It's just going to hit more of that piston, but it's going to hit enough of the piston, because in a competition between the piston and the valve, the piston will bend the valve and not the other way around. So if the piston hits the valve, bad things are going to happen to the valve. Sometimes bad things happen to the piston too. It can damage the piston depending on how hard it hits it and how far off you were on your calculations determining piston to valve clearance. But unfortunately for us in the LS, the dish piston does not really help us. So I'm hoping it changes our poll a little bit, because the valve overhangs that edge of the dish piston, and it's hitting the flat portion of our dish piston the same way that it hits all of the flat portion of the flat piston. So when you're checking piston to valve clearance, it becomes critical to check it no matter what kind of piston you have. I've had people tell me that, well, I have an LM7, it's got a dish piston in it, so I got a lot more piston to valve clearance. No, you don't. You actually have the same amount that you would if that was also a 5.3. You have a different amount if you're measuring it against a 4.8, as we talked about, because of those other things. Or if it's a 6.0 and a different head. So there are a lot of variables there to take into account when you're talking about piston to valve clearance. But in the end, what it comes down to is that you need to measure that. You need to, and if you're putting in the testing that I showed, like we were talking about the Brian Tooley truck Norris cam or small truck cams or those kinds of things, you can just put those in. You can put a stock cam in, you put those little cams in. There's plenty of piston to valve clearance available to you. You're not anywhere near where there's going to be a problem. If you're going to put the, a stage 3 or a stage 4 cam in, something that's in the 230s, you need to measure it because it's going to be close, especially on the intake side. And then as you start tightening up the LSA, it gets more problematic. So if you're running that big cam, figure on checking piston to valve clearance. And the way that we do it, the easy way for me I do it as a go, no go kind of thing. So I'll put a checker spring on the head. We'll put it all together. We'll hook up the rocker and the push rod. And when I check piston to valve clearance, I don't use a factory push rod. I use an adjustable push rod so that we can bolt the rocker all the way down. So it's down on the stand. So it's down on the rocker stand. Then I adjust the adjustable push rod because we have a very lightweight spring on it. And then the lightweight spring will not depress the lifter because the lifter is full of oil and it's already pushed all the way up. And we will never depress the lifter. We'll always depress the spring because the spring is very, very light. So I'll adjust the push rod, and we have like checker push rods designed to check what kind of push rod length we need. So we just spin it and adjust the length of the push rod, take all the lash out of the system, and then rotate the motor. And then all I have to do is get the motor in the right position, usually, plus 10 and minus or 10 before and 10 after TDC is kind of the range where we check. I personally like to check a lot more than that. Some people just check the interference points. I like to check 10 or 15 degrees before the interference point and 10 after, or 10 or 15 after. So I just go through the whole sweep. And what I'm doing is we have a dial indicator usually on the retainer for the valve. And what I'll do is we'll move we'll rotate the motor, get the cam in the position where it's starting to get close, and I'll just push the valve down with my finger. And we'll look at the dial indicator. Oh, we got 200 thousandths there. We got 200 thousandths there. And as I'm just rotating the motor just a little bit, and I'm doing this by hand, I'm not doing it with a starter or anything, just rotating the motor just a little bit, I'll keep pushing it down. And you'll get to the point where as you're pushing it down, the valve starts to hit the piston. And then you start looking at, okay, how much you'll get it to its closest point. Because you'll be able to feel that when you're pushing it down. You'll push it down. Oh, that's a lot. That's a lot. Oh, that's a little bit. That's a little bit. Okay, and then when you go past it, you'll go, okay, that's a lot. That's a lot. And so you put it in the middle point where that's a lot. That's a lot. That's a little. That's a little. And then you start tightening up your checking point and you're pushing it down. And then all I have to do is push the valve down and go, oh, that's whatever the number is. That's 30 thousandths. That's 20 thousandths. That's hitting. That's 100 thousandths, whatever the number is. But I can check that. And I usually do that twice. I just want to make sure that I put it in the right spot and check it in other spots. And I want to make sure that the number is accurate, and also do it again just to make sure that everything on my test procedure is accurate and all the things are tight and nothing is loosened up and the lifter has not moved. They usually don't, because I always check them with lifters that I've already run. And like I said, the spring is light enough to where it just wants to depress the spring. So as I'm pushing it down, I'll have to look at the dial indicator just moves. Okay, that's 100. That's 100. Oh, that's 80. Okay, that's 70. Oh, that's 50. I've run them as tight as 3,000, which I don't recommend at all. Don't ever do that. I did it because we had to run the cam. And as a motor, I didn't really care about. So I wanted to try to run this test and see what happened. Because here's the other thing that happens with piston to valve clearance. Thank you very much, whoever. I'm going to go down and see who donated money here. R. Keeley, I guess. Thank you very much. So as I'm doing this checking, we get closer and closer and closer. And like I said, I ran it at 3,000. But here's the thing that happens. When you're doing piston to valve clearance and you're checking it static. And what that means is you're checking it with the motor not running. Because what happens when the motor's running is there's, believe it or not, despite the fact that people use really heavy wall 3/8 push rods, there's lots of deflection and stuff. There's deflection in the rocker. There's deflection in the stand. There's deflection in the push rod. There's lots of deflection in lots of stuff. In a hydraulic lifter, there is too. So what happens is you don't actually get that same piston to valve clearance. You almost always have more piston to valve clearance than you check when you check it. Because a dynamic test, like I said, you're going to get deflection. And it could be a lot. It could be 15 or 20 thousandths, depending on what you're doing. I remember Brule telling me a story that was relayed to him, and I think it was from one of the top fuel guys, is that they were running the motor and they kept seeing witness marks on the push rod, because the push rod was hitting there's an opening in the head, and the push rod was hitting the aluminum head. And so it was transferring stuff onto the push rod. So they're hogging out the hole for the push rod. And so then they did it again. And then they saw witness marks. They're like, okay, the push rod's still hitting the hole. We need to hog that thing out. So they hogged it out more. They did it 4 times. And then eventually they just bent the push rod. Because what was happening is the hole where the push rod was keeping the push rod stable. And so when they gave it enough room, it had enough room for the push rod to deform enough, because it's going to deform enough where it just destroyed the push rod. So they're like, oh yeah, well, now it's okay for us to have the witness marks on the push rod. Let's make the hole smaller. So it has it's just a guide basically for the push rod. So we have push rod stability. So I thought it was an interesting story. That's kind of cool stuff. But that's what happens is that while you're running it dynamically, and the more that you go up in spring rate and RPM and all that stuff and change frequencies, the more deflection and stuff you're going to have. For most of us street motors that I like to talk about, you're going to have some. So you'll have, that little extra bit of wiggle room, which is the only reason when I was doing a static test, we had 3,000 or 4,000 clearance, which is the only reason I ran it. I'm like, I'm going to do it anyway. The cam's already in. Let's just run it and see what happens. And that's the only reason that we were able to get away with it. Again, I don't recommend that. Normally 30, 40 thousandths. And a lot of times, if you listen to the cam manufacturers, sometimes they'll say they want 100. I don't ever run it with that much. We run lots of stuff in camshafts that are between 30 and 50 thousandths. And it seems to work just fine. So let's see what you guys are doing tonight. Let's see how your night is going. Let's see how our poll is going. Does a factory dish piston like the LM7, like the LS that I showed in the video or in the thumbnail, offer more piston to valve clearance than a flat top? Not generically speaking. I'm talking about those specific ones, the factory pistons and the LS. Flat top versus a dish piston. Does a dish piston have more piston to valve clearance? We know that a dish piston can have more piston to valve clearance if the dish is in the proper spot. Okay, so let's see what's going on. Interesting. Never factored in deflection. There is quite a bit, and that's one of the cool things that the Spintron does for people like the guys from Comp. Obviously have one. Brian Tooley has one. And I remember him talking about deflections on individual components, which is really cool. Because when you see, that has 2,000s or 3,000s, that has 4 or 5, whatever, and you start running it and go, that's why we're not, because what's happening is you're not getting the lift from your cam. You're not getting the actual cam specs that are in your cam if you have that kind of deflection. So I'm sending a message here. There we go. So let's see what you guys got going on. Unfortunately, if you guys saw the live feed this morning that I did, I was headed out to a soccer game to watch my son, and the game didn't go quite like we wanted. He played very well, which was awesome, and I'm always very proud of him. Richard, what color Play-Doh do you use in measuring piston to valve clearance? I use whatever Westech has handy. Yellow seems to be the clay of choice. And the nice thing about it is when the modeling clay, I don't have to do that. I never liked the clay method because you'd have to cut it and take a stripe out and then measure it. And I just that is not nearly as good as the way that I just described, where I have a dial indicator on it, and then I could just push the valve down. I could just depress the spring, push the valve down to see what the actual valve clearance is. And for me, it works out a lot better. I need to see that stuff. And I think it works out better. I work with a dude that threw the wrong size bore on and the piston came out of the hole. The problem, and this, like I said, this happens with LS stuff, but luckily they use a fairly thick gasket. It's about 50 thousandths, between 50 and 53 thousandths. And so if it comes out of the hole less than 10, that still gives you, it's still going to give you, more than 40 thousandths piston to head clearance, which is what you're going to need. If you're taking deflection into account, how about lifter pump up? How do you factor that in? I don't know if the lifter, I don't know if that happens. I don't know if the lifter will overcome the spring. What about rod stretch? Yeah, all of that stuff is a consideration. Lifter pump up, apparently, rod stretch, and more so on aluminum rods. If you go to 2002 Engine Masters at CompCams, you'll see some Spintron testing. I've seen some of it. It's pretty good. The other guys that have it that I got to watch is the guys at Skunk have a Spintron. And while I was there doing the K series testing, they were doing both fairly high RPM B series and K series stuff. They were running 10,000 on the B series when I was there. 672 horsepower, 621 foot-pounds, LS53 turbo. My father's the owner, but we don't know what transmission to put on it. The last one didn't last a month. Yeah, if you were running a 4060E, I can understand that. Use a Tootsie Roll to measure piston to valve clearance. Tom, that's good. You got to get your projects done. What about piston rock? Again, another thing that you have to take into consideration. How much piston valve clearance do you need for your 13V? You're good. Working on the SR20 DET Baja Bug air suspension. Nice. I'm going to go back here. I have a 5 thousandths deck height, and is it 5 thousandths down in the hole or out of the hole, and a 39 thousandths gasket? Modeling clay doesn't usually stick. Sometimes we might put something on the valve. I usually want to stick to one side, just so that the valve doesn't do it. Like when I measure the clearance for the oil pickup and the pan, we'll use clay for that because I'm looking for a big measurement there. And what we'll do is we'll put the clay in. Hello. Oh, attack. We'll put the clay in a plastic baggie.
You rain.
Nice. It's a weekend. Thank you. Look at that. What a cute waitress. I wonder what she's doing later. Yeah, I'll put the clay in a plastic baggie, and then so when we, usually it's upside down, so we'll put the clay on top of the pickup, and then put the pan down and bolt it down, get it all cinched, and then take it off, and then we can measure. Because when you're doing that, when you're claying that, you're looking for 3/8 of an inch or something like that. So it's not as close usually as when we're measuring piston to valve clearance. Racer D, you recommended a comp to offer a Spintron package where they get the entire valve train. I think that would be cost prohibitive for them, but it would be kind of cool if they did a package that a racer could use and knew that it was stable. That's one thing I do like about the guys at Brian Tooley, is that they do a lot of cam testing to make sure that their stuff is stable, because that's important. I'd rather give up 5 or 6 horsepower or whatever and have the thing be stable and last for a long time. It's pretty easy to make really aggressive cam profiles, but the problem is they run for a while. And, oh yeah, I'm making all this power. That's great. I just hammered the lifters out of it. Can you recommend a transfer? You could do for the 5.3, prefers an auto. You can do a 4L80, or you could do a turbo 400. You just have to beef it up. Russell, can we do a definitive engine weight comparison? Well, you'd have to have somebody that has a scale for that. And the problem is that the way that you're swapping it in might be different than the way that they weigh it. What accessories did you use? What intake did you use? Do you have AC? Did you use steel motor mounts? Do you use aluminum ones? So some of that stuff can change. I missed the live feeds from the restaurant. We do need to do a happy hour horsepower. It's getting warm enough now. I had valve contact on my CT70H engine build. I just scraped out the intake relief in the piston with a sharpened file till it rolled over by hand. That I've done that before. We've done that with the on piston valve. We've done that with a Dremel, because if you can see where it's hitting, you can just take out what's necessary, as long as the piston crown has enough material there. Obviously, you can do that and then go in and knock down the sharp edges, hopefully, in your valve relief. Yeah, hopefully that's good information. I think people are really going to like what I have planned for the piston to valve video, because I've never seen it done before. Stock LY6 6-liter sloppy stage 2 cam, piston to valve clearance needed. You should have enough for that cam. That's a 228 cam. We ran one in the LY6 we with stock heads and stuff, and we didn't have any problems with it. Just curious is out. He's out. So let's see how our poll is going. I'm so surprised about this. And this is exactly why I do these videos. Does a factory dish piston offer more piston to valve clearance than a flat top? 55% saying yes and 45% saying no. 100% should be saying no. Match springs to cam, you can lessen that happen. Oh, lunchtime here in Australia. What's the max I can mill a 317 head with a dished LQ4 piston? The dish, as we just talked about, makes no difference. That doesn't matter that it's a dish piston. It's not going to change piston to valve clearance. And most guys on the 317 go like 30 thousandths on those on the mill, only because you start running into a problem with the intake lining up. Can you have an issue with a spring that's too stiff? Yes, you can. It's a too stiff of a spring is actually bad for a lot of things. It's bad for the rocker. It's bad for the lifter. It can be bad for the camshaft. There's no reason to have excessive spring pressure. What you need, and not just more or less, you need to have the right spring package. Actually, it's more than just a pressure thing. It's a frequency thing, which is why Racer D was right about guys offering matched packages. More critical for very high RPM stuff, but also important for, I think, for the average guy. Overbuilt in the house. In your experience, what's the weak point in the roller 351 Windsor? What is it you're trying to do? The factory intake manifold is not great. The factory heads are not great. If you get rid of that stuff, you're doing pretty good. You can braze a piece of a lathe stock to make a valve cutter. Isky offers those valve cutting tools, so you can buy that. And the thing is, though, that you have to make sure that you, I think that they have different shafts for those, because the cutting tool that we have has like a spring-loaded check valve that goes on to the square stock of the stem. So I'm sure that you could use that with different stem diameters. And because the problem is, you have an LS is going to be a metric stem diameter, and then if you're using a big block, it's different than a small block and all that stuff. What's your favorite aftermarket piston style for a 5.3 LS motor for NA and boost? It would be the same for both of those. It would be the one that came with it when I got it from the wrecking yard. Normally on LS motors, I run a flat top that has a valve relief in it, only because that way we can run more camshaft in it. So I can run as much camshaft as I want. If I'm putting a forged piston in it, I usually get a flat top that has valve reliefs in it. More camshaft if I want to run more camshaft. Also a flat top, so it will have more static compression. But I don't like dome pistons nearly as much for an LS. With a flat top, I can make enough compression. And since almost all the motors are eventually going to get some kind of boost, there's no reason for me to go to 11 or 12 or 13 to 1 for those applications, because I'm going to make up the power with boost anyways. I use the ISKI tool just to get the correct valve angle after angle milling heads and changing the valve angle. Okay. So we'll cheers to that. Frosty-Go beverage. The roller capable 351 Windsor blocks often have hairline cracks in the 2-inch bearing saddles. So Dean, a couple things. First, I like how you said often and not always. That's good. You cannot see it unless the engine is stripped. All small block Fords suffer in it. See, and now, see, I was just going to give you compliments on not using always and ever, and then you throw the all in there. All small block Fords suffer in that area. I'm going to tell you that I don't agree with that, because as we use the word all I have to do is find one that doesn't suffer from that. And I'm going to guarantee you that I can find one. Have you done a 4.8 assembly in an LS1 or 6-liter or 6.2? Yes, that video is already up. I ran a 4.8 crank and aftermarket rods and an aftermarket piston in an LS3 block. So I did a big bore 4.8. So Charles, we should all just embrace the Ford Y block, right? Uh, 351 does have a different main size than I think either a Cleveland or a 302. Todd's in the house. Everyone, my girlfriend Joanna and myself want to say thank you for all the support. We're sitting down having dinner tonight, which is rare. That's fantastic. Let me know when you're back so I can come up and get you hooked up, man. These guys stepped up some money. An FE block test. I think I might have access to an FE. My son's soccer coach has a 390 we might be able to use. That's how it usually is. Lab technician, use mag particle testing. Cool. And did you, when you did the testing, did you test all of the blocks? I put comp cam stage 3 cams on a 4.6 double overhead cam and had piston to valve contact. Not sure if it was incorrect installation or too big of a cam. A stage 3 cam seems like a pretty good size. I'd have to look up the specs, but it seems like a pretty big cam for a stock piston. Doesn't the huge 3-inch mains on the 351 Windsor limit RPM potential beyond a certain point? The question becomes, let's say that it is. Let's go down that rabbit hole. Let's say that the big main is limiting the RPM. That because of the big main that it spins faster than the smaller one does, and that it causes more friction or whatever the issue is. What is that point? And what is that point if we have an optimized oiling system? Like what if we ran a 351 with a 3-inch main and had a dry sump oiling system on it? Would that thing be a limit? I don't think it would. I don't. Though things like that are like, I can understand why people say, oh, that's too big and we want a smaller one because race motors have smaller ones. But is that? I mean, how much is that? When you get the Omni running, remember to do everything the traditional turbo Dodge way. Increase boost till you, here we go. This is going to be good. Increase boost till you blow a head gasket and note the boost, then back off the boost 1 to 2 pounds. So after the head gasket's blown, can I fix the head gasket at least? You should do a video on the L35 4800 4.3 liter. How is a 4800 a 4.3 liter V6? It comes in a 98 Chevy Blazer. Trying to get 500 horsepower at the wheels and need to know the best combination. You're definitely going to have boost. If it's a 4.3 liter V6, if it's the Vortec version of that, which is like the videos that I have up, I've never done 500 at the wheels, but we certainly could do that with a turbo version of that motor, assuming that the crank would stand up to that. What weight do you use on the dyno? It depends on what motor we're testing. A lot of the LS stuff gets 530 in it. 7.4 liter in my 3500. Machinist is trying to get me to spend money on a roller. You feel I need it or stick with a flat tappet? Truck is used to haul firewood. As long as there are lots and lots of flat tappet. This is probably a Gen 5 or a Mark IV motor, because those would be factory flat tappets. Lots of flat tappet motors out there running for endless amounts of miles. And so you don't have to put a roller in it. There are problems with flat tappet stuff now, more so than there used to be. But I feel that if you get it broken in correctly and it's working, then it probably will last after that. Ran into too tight of a piston to valve clearance on a stock L92 with a 454 cam. That seems like a lot. Something like 30 thousandths piston to valve at about 10 degrees after top dead center. First of all, 30 thousandths is probably enough, but that camshaft should have a little more than that. Do you think changing the rods or pistons is even worth for 15 pounds and less on the 5.3, at least for longevity, reliability, assuming all is well with a tune? I would put ring gap and bearings in it, and if you're running 15 pounds, you can do that all day with stock stuff. Richard is sending you an email regarding piston to valve clearance, no caps this time. See, look at that. That's good. You don't have to yell at people. I haven't seen the email though. Will you ever do videos on early 90s Super Coupes? I haven't. I'm going to say that I haven't seen those in wrecking yards, but I saw 2 of them in one day, which is very cool. But I didn't grab either one of them. I don't know that that's on the list. I think after I did the 3800, this latest 3800 V6 that we do with the GM stuff, I don't think I'll do the Ford stuff. I just don't know how prevalent that is anymore. There's a big market and there's a big group of people in Australia and all the Grand Prix and all that stuff that are here. So there's a lot more of those. There's a handful of Super Coupes that were ever produced. And so I don't know what it is, if that's going to benefit very many people. Everything Chevy. I'm rebuilding an LY6. I believe they have valve reliefs. It does. It has one valve relief. I can't remember if it's an intake or an exhaust because it has variable cam timing. I'm building an NA, looking for 500 to 600 horsepower. 600 horsepower NA is not going to happen. Going with TFS, sloppy stage 2. Yeah, that's not going to be a 600 horsepower combination. Any advice on possible good upgraded pistons? I would put a flat top in it with valve relief so that you can, if you want to make 600 horsepower, it's going to take more camshaft than that. That camshaft will work okay in that combination. It's just that it'll be a lot closer to 500 than 600. The new Kendall oil is great for flat tappets. Do I need 2050 oil with undersized bearings? I tried to email you and AOL is convinced that I'm a spammer and keeps blocking me. Yeah, 600 horsepower for a 6-liter is not an easy deal. That's going to be difficult. The motor that I built, and it was a built motor, built. It had forged pistons and forged rods. It had a stock crank and a stock block, but it had really good heads. It had airflow research heads, and it had a good sized cam in it. And it was a 239 cam, if I remember right, and a fast intake. And it just made 600. Maybe at a 150 shot to get 600. That will easily do it. That makes 600 a lot easier. If you only have to make 450 and then you can add a 150 shot, then that's really good. Really interested in the compression versus boost for pump gas tests you were talking about. I won't ever change compression versus boost. That's going to be way too involved because it's hard to take a motor apart and put pistons in it while it's on the dyno. I put a stage 3 cam in my LQ9, 231, 235, 635, 610. It fired up and the piston didn't hit. Well, that's one way to check it, right? Have you ever seen or heard of a dry sump with an electric oil pump? I don't think I have. You like undersized bearings? When I'm putting the motor together, sometimes we mix and match a standard and a standard on one side and a plus on the other side or a minus on the other side just to get the total clearance that we need. I know it seems weird, like it's only going to be good on one side, but it seems to work. How about an endurance low boost build test? Sodium versus stainlesses versus Inconel exhaust. Well, there's no way the dyno is going to test on which one of those makes power. To do a endurance thing means that we need to run it for 24 hours or whatever, and that's just not going to happen. Say you keep the low lift but gain it through rocker arm. With the physical peak of the lobe being shorter, could you get away with more duration? I don't know what you're asking there. You're trying to gain the lift through the rocker ratio? Have you seen the GM Motorsports Street Racer Stage 2 cam? They claim 100 wheel horsepower and no loss of power down low. I'd like to see that. That seems like a lot. What do you think about extra clearance bearings? Like I was just talking about, sometimes we have to run those. We want the clearance to be right. So how we go about getting that is that's one of the ways that we do it. Maybe get a set of factory shaved heads. LY6 sloppy stage 2 cam horsepower prediction stockhead 823. Mark, just take a look at the video that I have up. We already did that. I already did that test. I have a sloppy stage 2 cam test on an LY6 with those heads, so you can see exactly how much power it made. See? What is the best way to reach 500 horsepower to the wheels on a Pro Charge or turbo cost-wise and routing a 4.3 V6 Vortec motor? Well, you're going to make a lot more power per pound of boost with a turbo than you will with a blower, because you don't have the parasitic loss associated with driving the blower. So that gets subtracted from your total. With a turbo, it doesn't. So a turbo 4.3 liter V6 is going to make more power at 10 or 20 pounds, whatever you're going to run, than a Pro Charger will. How boring would a 24-hour dyno be? Westech has done some endurance stuff like that for some people, but it's not, it's not fun. For the stats from others. Well, Dean, and that's the problem. I know what you're saying, and that might be the case. It's just that to make statements like that, and we talked about this on other live feeds too, to make a statement like that, the requirements for that being valid is way more testing than you have done, or that I have done, or that anybody that I know has done. So like, there's no way to gather together every 351 block that's ever been produced and mag every one of them before and after they were run to find out if that's actually a design flaw. And that's the only way for you to determine whether or not that's the case. And then if you go through each one of them, you then would have to separate all of the blocks where whatever problem they ended up having was not from something else other than that design flaw. Believe me, I go down this rabbit hole all the time with people when they make statements, oh, you know, every 317 head is terrible or whatever they're going to say. I'm like, look, I'm not going to argue with you about whatever conclusion you've jumped to. But what I'm going to tell you is the level of testing required for you to make that statement and have it be accurate. You're not willing to do that. And I know because I test for a living and I'm not willing to do that. And I don't know that anybody would have the ability to do that. And so that's what I'm saying about this. And this is how misinformation gets started. Oh, every 351 block is junk. They're not. And there's no way for you to tell me otherwise until every one of them has been tested. And there's no way that that's ever going to happen. So until that happens, that's not accurate. That's the way that I look at it as a person that tests for a living. My Coyote had 850 horsepower running 15 pounds on E85. I fueled up one night and got bad fuel and ruined my motor. New Ford Performance short block, 9.5 to 1, 704 horsepower 91 at 8 psi. That's a good amount of power on 91. Yeah, Eric, that's a perfect example, and that's why I love these live feeds, because we get information. Like, Dean's a great guy. I mean, he's obviously very knowledgeable, but that's why we can have this kind of interaction. That's a perfect example. The other example he's using is the North Star. Oh, all the North Stars are junk. They're not. I know that they're not. Because I have had people tell me that you can't run more than 10 pounds on an LS motor. I've had people tell me that. I've had people tell me that you can't run boost on Honda engines, or that 4.6 modular Fords, you can only make 400 horsepower and then they break. So I've had people tell me all kinds of crazy stuff, and I just don't listen to it. I just do what I think is going to work, or find out if it is going to work and just do it anyway and see what happens. That, you know, that's the thing. I think Napoleon said that we're going to show up and see what happens. And if he didn't say that, he should have. And the same thing. So the other motor I was thinking about, the North Star, and I know nothing about them other than I've seen a few of them run in sand rails at West Tech. But the other one that has that bad reputation is Racer D's. What's the one that Smokey Unick did? The Iron Duke. Oh, Iron Dukes are junk. Okay, but how many of them are not? And if we have an Iron Duke and it makes this amount of power and then we add boost, isn't it going to do that? It's not going to just self-destruct because we put a turbo on it. I just don't think that's going to happen. Will you ever do a comparison between a 4.3 V8 and the 4.8? I think that video is already up. A 4.3, the L99, the LT1-ish Gen 2 kind of small, the L99 basically, is not even in the same league as a 4.8 LS. It's 100 horsepower down. How much power can a roller 351 Windsor take? I know we've done 11 or 1200, I think. I haven't looked at the second video yet, Racer. I only looked at the one because it's the only one I can find. So you have my email, so send me a link to that video. Corey, I have an LS book here that states 0.8 of a thou to 2.1 main bearing clearance. The factory bearing clearances on an LS are very tight, which is one of the reasons that they have such high oil pressure. I don't run my bearing clearances anywhere near that. Mine are all beyond the loosest number that they're giving there. Mine are more like 2.5. .48 piston and a 5.3 stock motor, stock cam, horsepower gains, I don't know, maybe 10. Does the turbo oil feed make a big difference in oil pressure versus NA? Yes, it does. If you if you run a line off of your system and feed the turbo, you're going to get a drop in oil pressure. I haven't seen any meth injection shootout videos. I want to see one. Take a look at the test that I did comparing the snow performance stuff versus the two different kinds of windshield washer fluid. I don't think you're going to see much there. Cracks on the piston sleeves on a 351, factory flaw or over revved. That's probably not a factory problem. Send the email again. I don't have an email for you, but I have put my email address up here many times. I'll put it up again, and you can send me over copy68.com. There we go. Recommendation on the most aggressive cam to run in an NA 462 valve without having dishing pistons has long tubes and socket manifolds. I don't know. You have to measure piston to valve clearance. That's what we were just talking about. I think that the 262 cam will fit, so that might work. After that, you're going to have to measure. Should I be safe and sleeve 4.3 liter Vortec motor to reach 500 horsepower? I don't think that the block is going to be the problem. I think that crankshaft in the 4.3 liter is going to be the problem. And you'd be better off starting with a later 4.3, like the LU, what is it, the LU3 or the LV3? Those have much better cylinder heads. Todd, you're taking off? All right, man, be safe. I'll hit you up midweek. Todd, I might be gone at West Tech, so but if I am, I'll hit you up when I get back. I miss your recommended piston to valve clearance. We've run stuff as tight as 3,000s, but 30 or 40 seems to be a usable number. What's up with mismatched rocker arms? I tried that on my Engine Masters motor, and I didn't see very much on it. Sometimes we tried doing it with, because I was running I tried a single plane manifold. I ended up running a dual plane. But on a single plane manifold, we tried matching them intakes and then exhaust, intakes only and then exhaust only, and then both of them. On the long runners and the short runners, we tried all kinds of stuff. Gen 5 GM 5.3 liter, is that technically an LT swap if I use it in a different vehicle? I have the Gen 5 at 5.3 liter is an L83, and I have tests up. I have one that we've run on some stuff. One more minute. Have you tested the aluminum 5.3 liter front wheel drive? No, I didn't know that they made an aluminum front wheel drive version of that motor. Was the LS4, which I think is what that is, was that an aluminum motor? If it is, I should have grabbed that one. It does have weird stuff on it, but for the dyno, it wouldn't be a problem. Ceramic top-coated pistons. The piston tops, I think, can help. We don't normally run it, but I think it can help. See, I would like to see. I've seen, and I've always wanted one, like the 3800 swap in the Fieros and the Ecotech swaps, and I've seen lots of stuff swapped in the Fieros. But I'd like to see somebody run an Iron Duke, like a turbo Iron Duke, and run 10s with that thing. How much of a, okay, so this will be the last question for tonight. And before I answer that, I'm going to go ahead and close out our nearly 50-50. So 54% saying yes, 46% saying no. Does a factory dish piston offer more piston to valve clearance than a factory flat top? The answer is no, it does not, because the valve is still going to hit the edge. So we'll end that. How much of a correlation to engine load to timing on 91 fuel do you think we would see, like heavy truck versus car? Would the car be able to have more timing due to load? Yes, I think so. The weight of the vehicle and the gearing is definitely going to have an effect on, and then the temperature also is definitely going to have effect on the octane requirements for that combination. Think about it. Just think about it in an extreme application. Let's say that you put it in a truck that weighed 20,000 pounds. And so it would be much more problematic than if you put it in a car like a Sprint Turbo that weighed 1,500 pounds. So use it at extremes. You could run all the timing that you wanted in a lightweight car. It'd be there would be no problem at all. Okay, guys, thank you all for showing up. As I said, that was the last comment for tonight. Thank you guys all for showing up, and hopefully you guys have taken a look. I put the video up already on the cam springs and boost on an LS, the secret recipe for making horsepower out of really any motor. It doesn't have to be an LS. It could be a small block Chevy or big block Chevy, whatever. Any of those. It could be even an Iron Duke. It could be that as well. But any kind of motor, you know, put a decent cam in it, put springs in it, put boost on it, and then have the right amount of fuel and all that stuff. And magically, all kinds of good stuff happens. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will see you guys all tomorrow. I have to go see if that waitress is busy. See what she's got. See if I can get some digits.